Good morning. We're going to open up and begin our continued budget hearings. And I'm chairing at this particular time. I'm Vice President Sharon Green Middleton, council member of the 6th District and member of the committee. And to my left is Councilwoman Mary Pat Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And to her left is Councilman, look, I had a blank. Councilman Ryan Dorsey. Councilman Ryan Dorsey. And to my far right is Councilman Bill Henry. And then also staff to the Budget Committee and Hearings is Marguerite. Thank you, Marguerite, for all the things you've been doing all week long for all of the offices and of the administration. So now at 11 a.m. we're going to be hearing the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services under Office of Human Services. And we'll start with introductions. And if you have your staff with you, you can, start with introducing yourself and them, and then you can do your presentation.
Okay. So, good morning, Chairman Middleton, members of the staff, the council, and Baltimore City neighbors. I am Jerry Ann Anthony, Director of the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services with the Mayor's Office of Human Services. With me today, we have our Deputy Director, Mr. John Turner. He's been with us for all of 6 weeks, 2 months. We also have our Director of Fiscal Services, Mr. Amir Asadi, our Chief of Staff, Hannah Roberts, and our Director of our Outreach Team, Ms. Jessie Stevens. Can I proceed? Is it okay?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. I'm excited to testify before you today regarding the department's fiscal 2020 proposed budget. Homeless Services Program is tasked with making homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring for residents of the city of Baltimore. We have learned a lot this year about our existing services, strengths as a community, identified gaps, and are aggressively working to realign our staff, our resources, and our services to better meet the needs of vulnerable residents. Today, I'd like to take an opportunity to speak with you about our challenges, our successes, and vision for fiscal year 2020 and beyond. FY19 has been an eventful year for homeless services. Today, during this year's point in time count, we counted 2,294 homeless households. Of those, 380 were unsheltered, staying in places not meant for human habitation during the surveying period. This represents a 10% reduction in homeless households since our last combined count, which was conducted in 2017. It is important to note that we suspect that despite the fact that the surveying was conducted during some of the coldest nights in the last week of January, this number is likely an undercount. Unique to the city of Baltimore, we have households who seek refuge in abandonments, which we are oftentimes unaware of unless reported by our partners, neighbors, or city officials like yourself. In response to several concerns we heard from the community, we've divided our homeless outreach street teams by districts to ensure full coverage of the entire city, affording us the opportunity to respond to constituent requests for concerns and engagement as quickly as possible. I've included in your packets a copy of the map, which outlines specific outreach teams that are designated and assigned to each district. This year, Homeless Services launched the Medicaid pilot program, serving nearly 100 formerly homeless households in partnership with HABC and Healthcare for the Homeless. This unique opportunity has allowed us a unique opportunity to leverage Medicaid for supportive services for households exiting homelessness into permanent housing. We've initiated pilot community collaborations in Districts 11 and 12 and are grateful for the partnerships and support of the Casey Foundation, Councilmember Stokes, Councilmember Costello, and neighbors in Midtown. Communities in Mount Vernon, Madison Park, Charles North, and Bolton Hill have partnered to engage our homeless neighbors, business communities, and faith-based organizations. Collectively, we recognize that ending homelessness improves lives. Today, I'd like to thank them for their willingness to engage our office and be part of the solution and effort to end homelessness in our community. With the support of the Casey Foundation, Baltimore was one of 7 communities competitively selected and funded under the National Pathways Forward Challenge. This is a systems change project and joint effort between the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services and the Mayor's Office of Employment and Development to increase employment and income for people experiencing homelessness, particularly those who are unlikely to receive a housing intervention through our existing resources. MOHS has worked closely with the continuum of care to elevate the voices of and decision-making opportunities for people with lived experience. We understand that it is important that our work be informed by those we serve. Therefore, we value their voices and commit to supporting a continuum of care capable of assisting our vulnerable neighbors. We've additionally partnered with hospitals to explore innovative funding model to provide permanent housing to many of the city's most vulnerable. Lastly, MOHS is currently partnering with local philanthropic partners to discuss opportunities to align funding, leverage resources, and gain a better understanding of the return of our investment in interventions designed to prevent and end homelessness. As with any entity, we have also experienced challenges this fiscal year. As many of you are aware, we launched a bridge housing program in response to an encampment last year. From this experience, we learned the importance of having a coordinated outreach approach and strategy, the necessity of strategic planning, the importance of developing contracts that articulate and outline performance measures capable of moving people from shelter to permanent housing, the value of training and supporting our participating providers throughout our continuum of care, and the necessity of monitoring regardless of funding source. We have a lot of work to do. However, we are very excited to get started. As we look forward to the creation of a new agency effective July 1st, the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services has worked closely with our continuum of care to develop a 3-year action plan which will serve as our framework to move the city's efforts forward to bring homelessness to functional zero. This action plan is also included in the packets that you guys have before you. This does not mean that no resident in the city of Baltimore will never face homelessness again. But what it does mean is that we are committed to developing an effective homeless service system that prevents housing loss when possible, quickly shelters and stabilizes those in need, and promptly facilitates connections back to permanent housing with any necessary supportive services. Our action plan consists of 5 strategies that we believe will aid in the transformation of our homeless service system. They include increasing the supply of affordable housing. We know that the single most important thing that we can do as a community is to increase the supply of affordable housing within the city of Baltimore. Therefore, we are committed to advocacy, the reallocation of existing resources to develop and enhance permanent housing opportunities, and developing partnerships to support the sustainability of housing, affordable housing, for Baltimore City residents. Our second strategy is creating a more effective homeless response system. Our current system, as it is, makes it extremely difficult for people who are already in a state of crisis to access vital services, such as shelter. Therefore, this strategy seeks to provide awareness and clear access to households to get the support they need as quickly as possible to stabilize and receive the support they need to aid them on their journey. Our third strategy is transforming our emergency shelter system. The city has done a great deal to meet the needs of those in crisis through the conversion of several city-owned facilities into emergency shelters. However, few of our facilities are in dire need of repair and replacement to provide and enhance shelter services for those in need. This year, for the first time ever, the city is releasing an RFP for shelter contracts with performance outcomes to ensure the return of our investment and promote the inclusion of best practices and strategies to encourage and promote movement from homelessness to housing. Our fourth strategy is improving access to employment and economic opportunities. We know that improving access to employment and economic opportunities are vital to our households' abilities to sustain permanent housing. Therefore, we are aggressively working to ensure that households are connected to mainstream resources and workforce development elements that will allow city residents to obtain, maintain, and sustain housing long-term. Last but not least, our fifth strategy is establishing a racial equity agenda. Historic and current structural racism contribute to homelessness and housing insecurity. Therefore, it is important that we work with our partners to provide and prioritize the development of a racial equity agenda for all continuum planning, activities, and policies. In closing, the FY 2020 proposed budget allocated to Homeless Services Program will play a critical role in supporting residents' efforts to reach and remain on a pathway to housing permanency and stability. Every day, I am reminded that the success of our homeless services system, the success of a homeless individual or family, is not predicated on a single provider or my single agency alone, but on the community as a whole. I look forward to developing cross-sector partnerships with our sister agencies, communities, partners, to ensure that our vision as outlined in our action plan becomes a reality. The council and this committee are critical allies in this effort, and I look forward to our continued work together to achieve our shared goals and give each resident access to critical services they need to overcome an episode of homelessness. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to answering any questions you guys may have.
Thank you so much for the very informative package of information that you've given to each of us. I also want to, we were also joined by Councilman Burnett to my left and Councilman Stokes to my right. As we all know, homelessness in the city is just so very important for our city. We also get people from around our surrounding counties that come to the city for help and assistance. Thank you for your detailed presentation, and at this point, we'll go ahead and get some questions from our council members, and we'll start with Councilman Henry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'd like to start with talking about bathrooms.
Certainly.
So, what does your office do to try to promote access to bathroom facilities for the homeless?
So thus far, what we've done is initiated conversations with community organizations and civic organizations, associations that have a concern with homelessness and urinating, defecating in their neighborhoods. We have recently partnered with Councilmember Stokes to bring mobile showers and restrooms to District 12. We have a provider who is willing and ready and able to go to other districts to provide that service. But what we try to do is advocate to the community to be a part of the solution. So recognizing that there is a problem, that people are in need and may not have places to go, we oftentimes will try to talk to the community to see if there are designated areas in the community where people can seek refuge to use the restroom. And then when and where possible, we bring partners to the table, such as this mobile shower and restroom unit, to provide additional services as needed.
So for the homeless who tend to spend a lot of time out in front of City Hall on the plaza, where are their bathroom facilities?
So there are restroom facilities at WHRC, which is right off of Fallsway. There's also access to our Daily Bread, which is also in the Fallsway area. We additionally have drop-in centers across the city, so Beans and Bread, which is located in the lower kind of downtown area, and My Sister's Place, which is in Mount Vernon. As part of the RFP that we are releasing, we are requesting that all of our shelter facilities have the ability to remain open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We believe that this will dispel people from spilling out into the communities during the day and having to utilize the restrooms on the streets because they have no alternative place to go. As it is right now, we have 2 shelter facilities, 1 family and 1 singles shelter that is open throughout the day. However, our others close at 6 a.m. and clients are required to leave the facility and are not allowed to return until 7 p.m. So we're hopeful that if we allow them to stay, to remain, to engage in services, to have access to the things that they need, that we will see a decrease in some of those concerns moving forward.
That you're aware of, has any effort been made to reach out through city bureaucracy to ensure that all agencies that operate city buildings throughout the city have a policy of allowing people to just come in and use a public bathroom? And the two reasons I'm pointing this out, a year or so ago, my district office up on York Road is in the same building as a community action partnership center. I come back to my office and find an older gentleman relieving himself against the wall on the Glenwood side of the building. You know, I asked him if he could not do that, and his response was, well, they won't let me come inside. So I had to go inside and tell the woman at the front desk, if people come and ask to use the bathroom,
Right.
they should be allowed to do that, even if they're not getting any other service from the center. I tell that story because the other day, as I was leaving here, I got in my car out on the cobblestone, and as I'm driving off, I see a gentleman coming from just behind the bushes where he had been relieving himself right here against City Hall. And I'm thinking, if I'm hanging out during the day in the shade of the plaza, I'm probably not going to be walking 3 or 4 blocks up the Falls Way
Go to the restroom.
to if, you know, when I literally have public buildings surrounding me that apparently I'm not allowed to go into and use their restrooms. How could we as the council support you in that effort?
I love the idea. I would be extremely supportive of working with each and every one of you to ensure that that access is in place for our homeless neighbors in need. I think that's important. Like to your point, they are city-owned facilities. Many of them are open to the public, and people should have access to utilize the restroom, particularly when they're in a situation where they're already in crisis and don't have access to the necessities that they need.
And my last thing, and I'll pass the baton quickly, is I'm very happy to hear that you're working with Councilman Stokes to bring the mobile facilities offline. I'd love to have a conversation about doing what we can to also partner with you in the 4th District.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think every council person would love to partner and help out as best as they can.
Thank you.
Are you finished, Councilman?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Councilwoman Clark.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your great work, and thanks for helping us out up there in Northern District. And we'd like one of those showers with the bathroom that.
Yes,
yeah.
ma'am.
They're going to love it in Roland Park.
We'll get that for you.
Yeah, but let's talk about it. Make sure we coordinate with everybody, including
The community.
Northern District, please.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. 2 things. Let me start with racial equity agenda. So we've had this conversation. Let me just have it publicly. We have vendors who are not the classic kind of 501c3s with that has a grant writer attached and all those kinds of things, such as Ms. Flowers here, who is where I go if I have somebody that desperately needs right now to be sheltered, to have a place. She has always taken those people in and taken them in. I don't even know how she does it. I actually do know how it works. I believe she rents buildings and for this purpose, and then has people move in, and it's a stable kind of a thing until they can get their feet on the ground. So, and you need to be someplace in order to begin to get housing, as you well know. You have to have a place
Stable place.
where you can operate from, or it's a very, very desperate effort to actually get any kind of housing, let alone affordable or voucher. So as we looked at everything through an equity lens, I would highly suggest that the homeless program is a good place to start looking at vendors that way as well. Non-traditional, non-formalized, but tested out and reliable providers of emergency and temporary housing. What that means is that you're not going to get one of these typed up, answering all the right questions applications. I don't know why, it just isn't going to happen. And so the test, however, is where's the facility? What does it look like? Are people being treated fairly? They're not being ripped off. They're someplace in a code compliant location and getting some kind of services actually in terms of referrals, and they have an address. So I know that the answer to this is immediately federal funds, the kinds of monies that are coming in to the homeless program that come from places other than us, that come with requirements that cannot be waived. But if we could find a way to have people that are assigned to these districts also work to help just write these applications that have to be submitted, I think it would be very helpful, and it would open the door to a whole world of providers who are really grassroots, neighborhood-based, but could certainly meet levels of reliability, integrity, decency, and effectiveness. So I know that you don't have the power all by yourself to do this, but I hope that you would take it up in this world of now, of equity lenses, and let that lens shine also on providers. And knowing the shortcomings with regard to formal applications. It's just going to be there, but that doesn't take away from the quality, which needs to be verified, of the provisions, the space. So I guess in a minute I'll ask you if there's a way you can do that.
Okay.
But my second question, so is there a way that you might be able to begin to do that, and what kind of help would you need?
Okay.
And secondly, and I've worked with Ms. Flowers for years on end. I speak from experience, and experience with her, but also with people that she is housing that I have referred. Secondly, you spoke about a reallocation of resources, and what, in the context you were saying it, I immediately thought of development resources. So what I thought of was the shelters you were talking about that needed to be rehabilitated in order to meet standards of decency, and the kind of money that would require, as well as a movement of resources from where every developer wants to develop in the city's list of public and private developments into where we could actually develop affordable housing or temporary housing. You know, all the ideas about, is it little houses, tiny houses?
Tiny houses.
Tiny houses?
Yes, ma'am.
Tiny houses, things like that. That we have capital resources. It's a matter of how do we move them from one place to the other. And so, yeah. So basically, I would appreciate it if you would, in the course of your work, not now, look at where you would move some of the development resources that you see on the capital improvement list or in the maintenance list, which also includes a lot of rehab, et cetera.
Yes, ma'am.
And tell us your ideas. I mean, submit your ideas just for the information. It's a wish list. Call it a wish list. If I had my wishes, I would take this much capital, and under an equity lens, I would move it to this part of Baltimore for that kind of development, or that part of Baltimore for just generic kind of thing.
Okay.
So if I can get back to my question, is it possible at all for you to lay the groundwork for the kind of racial equity for vendors that I was discussing when I first started to ask questions?
It is very much possible for us to employ some grassroots organizations to do this work. We value, to your point, sometimes I call Ms. Flowers for information. She is a wealth of knowledge and is extremely helpful in helping to find out what's at the core of the issue. We can absolutely fund and look forward to being able to fund grassroots organizations. We believe that it is important that the service providers providing the services look like the clients that they are providing services
Yeah.
to. That would assist in engagement. It would allow for our engagement numbers to increase because people, I mean, the fact of the matter is people are comfortable talking to people
Right.
that look like them, that can identify with the experiences that they have been through. And so we are supportive of that. To your point, and we have had many conversations with Ms. Flowers and other providers about regulations. So with our federal funds and our state funds, they come with a set of regulations that we are required by law to abide by. General funds is an opportunity for us to pilot some type of grassroots program that could employ and work with local grassroots providers some are already doing this work just as part of their passion or volunteer work. And so with additional general funds, we could support a pilot program to do something of this sort. Specific to Ms. Flowers, and I've spoken to her about this as well, it is important that she identify what type of program she would like to run. Ms. Flowers is great at all things. And so she does outreach, she does housing, she does case management at times. She has to pick one, and we've had that conversation, but we're more than willing to work with her to do some grassroots work to be able to help those in need to continue because she's already doing it.
Well, she's never going to settle for that, but I think you all can negotiate. I think you're up to negotiating that out.
I am.
But I appreciate that, and let me ask you, what amount of money in general funds would you need added to your budget if, not that you're asking for it, but that you're just answering a question, in order for you to develop the kind of pilot project you're talking about?
I think it would be specific to the type of project she's trying to develop. So I'm happy to get back to you. We can provide a table according to the type of program. So if it's prevention and diversion, kind of stopping people from coming into our shelter, I would estimate about $250K to be able to successfully launch a program of that nature. If it's outreach, probably along the same lines. If it's permanent housing or it's some type of housing program, because I know she has a lot of emergency shelter beds,
Yes.
it may be slightly more. So I'm happy to put together some numbers and get back to you, but based off of those two programs off the top of my head, somewhere in the ballpark of $250K would be appropriate.
Well, the reason I ask it now is that now is the hour
Absolutely.
for us to ask the administration for what it is that we ask them for. So, if you can, Jeff, if you could write that down. We're talking $250,000 general funds so we can go grassroots with a grassroots equity lens on providers of homeless services. specifically in this case of housing, right? She won't ever choose. I would like to choose for her. We need housing.
Thank you, Councilwoman Clark.
Thank you.
Also joining us is Councilman Schleifer, a committee member, and also Vice Chair Pinkett, which will be taking over. And we're going to hear next from Councilman Stokes.
Thank you. Jerry Ann, I want to just thank you and your staff for thinking outside the box, because I know homelessness is not just a Baltimore City issue. It's citywide, it's worldwide. And I want to thank Continual Care for their leadership in putting together some providers to push that out in the neighborhoods. Also want to mention that we have 2 officers who called the Hot Team, 2 female officers who work the whole city, the entire whole city, to deal with homelessness in terms of not just arresting people, but wraparound services for them. And we kind of missed that, and I'm looking forward to how can the police department add some more staff to the police department to deal with homelessness in the city. But I want you to explain their role in terms of helping you here with the homeless here in Baltimore City, because I know they're a great help to you.
Absolutely. So the Hot Team are great partners to us. Oftentimes when our outreach teams are going out and engaging with individuals, our approach is to try to offer as much engagement as humanly possible. So we will go out 2 or 3 times a week, seeking to engage the same folks, because we feel like the more we come out, the more likely they will warm up to us and take advantage of the services that the city has to offer. The Hot Team has been extremely helpful to us, and we are very grateful for their partnership when we have clients that we absolutely need to move on because it has become a public safety issue, or they are doing things like urinating or defecating in areas, or sometimes sleeping in places that are just not appropriate. Residents are calling and complaining. They have been extremely helpful in coming out to help us to enforce and engage individuals. Sometimes people are reluctant to engage with us, but when they see the Hot Team, they're all about it. And so their partnership has been vital to the work that we do. And we look forward to continuing to work with them and are hopeful that they can expand.
And your staff and the Hot Team, they do a great job in Charles Village, which has some other issues. But I also want to mention that I've been talking about a lot of people like to feed homeless people, and I was saying it for 3 years. Where are they going to go to the bathroom? That's been an issue. So the gentleman Rich now has the mobile shower. I think he have 3 mobile showers on there. Actually going to have wraparound services there for homeless, but it's going to be located over here on Bath Street. And a lot of communities say, how are you going to address the homeless problem in Baltimore City? But if you use the mobile shower, they don't want it in their neighborhood. That's been the issue.
Well, that's right.
We had to almost find different places and locations, because they'll be over near the Double Team Dine on some days, and then they'll be over on Bath Street. But, you know, people understand there is a homeless problem in Baltimore City, but as soon as you say you're going to put a mobile shower near their house, near their business, that's a whole different issue you got to deal with. So I want to thank you and the group and Rich and his mobile shower, how we were able to come to a compromise with Councilman Costello to locate those 2 locations. So thank you for all you do.
And we thank you and Kathy for all of your support. Really helpful just to bring together the business owners in that area to have a conversation about what that looks like and how it impacts them. And so we're extremely grateful for the conversations you convened and we're willing to be a part of to help us make that happen.
Councilman Dorsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jerry Ann, thank you. Can you mentioned how long, John? Yep. You've been with the office 6 weeks?
2 months.
2 months, all right. How long have you been in this position?
I started with the city on August 20th of 2018.
Okay, so like 6
approximately
months.
9 months.
Okay. So you came in on the tail end of the Volunteers of America thing.
I did.
I don't think I need to belabor the point that that was a debacle. I mean, that was an absolute waste of money, a total failure of a program. It just stunk from start to finish. And there's a draft report on that that's damning to that effect. I need to just, my concern is that we're never repeating those kind of mistakes again. And it has, and I spoke about this publicly at the outset of that program. I spoke about it during the budget hearing last year. I spoke about it in a subsequent hearing closer to the end of the year, which is what resulted in there even being a report on it. But it seemed very clear from the outset that it was a thinly veiled kind of cover up for just encampment clearing, and it was the second of two very public kind of encampment clearing efforts that occurred earlier, under Mayor Pugh, which I find objectionable, and especially, with no real backup, no information to back up the practice of simple encampment clearing. Right. Can you speak to resources that this report also kind of refers to this program as bridge housing? I think either elsewhere in here, it's been referred to as rapid rehousing, and these are terms of art that this really does not fall into what anybody in the field, I think, would refer to as rapid rehousing or bridge housing. It's just like it's a really, really bad representation of what those things mean and what they're supposed to be and how they're supposed to be, how they can be successful.
Absolutely.
Can you talk about intentions of continuing to deploy resources for anything like bridge housing, rapid rehousing? And then also, I'd like to hear about this other program. During the same time, I had a woman contact my office who said, I've been trying to get housing assistance. I've been contacting the city for a decade looking for housing assistance, and I've never been able to get any help. And what ended up happening was Terry Hickey said, well, we have this program where we've got landlords. We just maintain a list of landlords who are willing to rent places for $500 a month. And we just get them into there, and we have this money, and we just pay this $500 a month for an indefinite length of time to put people in places. And they ended up eventually, after a couple months of badgering from my office, putting this woman into a place only to have her sending me cell phone photos the very next day showing that it was obviously full of black mold and that it was completely deplorable conditions, that this was not a place that any housing inspector would ever approve for human occupancy. This like complete lack of accountability for programs that were taking place in 2018 and practices that were taking place in 2018, that I think, given there being any level of funding at all for the efforts, those things need to be accounted for. Can you speak to those things? Absolutely. And the changes? And
so I'll start with bridge housing. Your question was to discuss any plans that I have for resources dedicated to a program of that nature. So I want to speak to a little bit about what I understand to be the reason they went in that direction and the intention, and then I'll speak specifically to your question. So absolutely right. In response to several encampment clearings, I think the city came up with this program, bridge housing, which was supposed to be temporary shelter for these individuals. On the back end of this temporary bridge housing project, it was connected to a rapid rehousing program. Rapid rehousing in other communities is a short-term intervention, typically anywhere from 3 months to a year in nature, where people are housed. We are helping them to identify housing, and once they get into housing, we provide a subsidy based on their income, in hopes of that by the end of the subsidy, they are able to sustain that housing independently. In order for households to be able to sustain housing independently at the end, there should be case management, and that case management should be catered to their specific need. So the residents, our neighbors who were members of those encampments, many of them were chronically homeless, meaning they have been on the streets for years, and many of them had disabilities. Whether or not rapid rehousing was the correct intervention to be assigned, I am not clear. However, I do recognize that we have limited permanent housing, and so my thought, I wasn't here, but my thought is that the intention was to get these households into rapid rehousing, and then with intentional case management, we could make an assessment of whether or not permanent housing was needed on the back end. The issue of concern with that is that it, again, in order for that to take place, it requires case management. And what we saw in the program that Councilmember Dorsey is referencing is there was limited to no case management being provided. So at the end of the subsidy, people who were chronically homeless, many vulnerable, were left with no way of sustaining that moving forward. I started in August. However, this program concerned me, and it concerned me for a number of different reasons. To your point, like, I don't know that we did our due diligence in really planning this program out. And so what we will do moving forward is we will not go into situations where we're making irrational decisions on the fly without fully thinking through a program and how it impacts people's lives. Because at the end of the program, many of those adults that we serve through this program are worse off than they were when they went in. In fact, we are aware that at least one individual took his own life as a result of finding out that his housing subsidy was ending. And out of fear of having to return to the streets, he took his life. And so we take that extremely serious and know that that cannot continue to happen moving forward. A few things denoted in your remarks that I want to address, like what we plan to do moving forward. So being intentional about our strategies. As outlined in our action plan, we know we have encampments in the city. We need to be thoughtful about what we're doing about those encampments. It's not that many people want to just be living in places not meant for habitation. We have no place for them to go. And so we have to be committed to developing affordable housing and permanent supportive housing that are capable of getting people from where they are and into services that can really help them to be successful, as opposed to making decisions and just kind of trying to move people along so that they're out of sight and out of mind. When we move people into housing, regardless of what the funding source is, we should be doing inspections. So there's a habitability process that is required for state and federal funding. We are implementing the same requirements for our general funded programs. It makes no sense for us to move someone from the streets into a place that looks worse than the place that they were living on the streets. We are committed to providing dignified living.
Can I just ask you a
Absolutely.
question? I mean, the conditions of the particular house that the woman I referenced was put in were bad enough, and in an area that has a high enough concentration of vacancy that it raised real concerns whether, for me, even the person who the city was interfacing with, it raised questions for me whether that person actually had any rights to that property at all, whether it might have just been some vacant house that somebody had changed the locks on and said, oh yeah, I got a place, and no real due diligence had been done to know even whether or not this was some person, just some guy taking advantage of this opportunity. And so I appreciate the commitment to safe and quality conditions. I also want to express my sense that we need to be committed to due diligence and and doing background,
On our
vetting
landlords.
and things like
Right.
that.
Another thing that's specific to state and federal funding right now, they don't allow subleasing. So you have to be the owner of the property in order to lease to our clients. So that is a standard for our state and federal funding that we will be bringing over to our generally funded programs as well.
Is there a gray area in there where somebody's leasing not to the client, but leasing to the city on behalf of the client? Like
No, we don't do.
this person wasn't paying the rent, the city was paying the rent.
We don't do subleases.
Okay.
To your point about that, so there's a number, the last thing I'll say about use of funds for programs similar to bridge housing and rapid rehousing is monitoring. So if we're giving funds to any provider, like regardless of funding source, moving forward into fiscal year 2020, we will be monitoring them. We believe that it's important that we know how the money that we are giving providers are being spent. There are homeless clients on the streets that are depending on us to be good fiscal agents of this funding. And so, again, we take that very seriously, and we'll be monitoring programs to ensure that the services that we've outlined in the contract are being delivered.
I appreciate that. To kind of finish the story of that in particular individual, they were then taken out of that place and put into a hotel, and I actually have no idea what happened after that person was placed into a hotel. But again, like the department, the office spending money to put somebody into a hotel, especially without any like real game plan, this really speaks to the importance of the statement you made earlier about intentionality having to be at the kind of the forefront of action, and really, at some other point you talk generally about bridge housing, and you use the words in hopes of, and I think that implicit in what you're saying is that hope actually isn't a strategy. Right. That like we can't be going without intentionality. And I think what you're saying about being a good fiscal steward is that probably it's better to really intentionally help a smaller number of people than it is to not actually assuredly help a big number of people that we just threw some kind of money at.
Right. Our intention is not to just throw money at the problem. Like, again, we want homelessness to be rare, brief, and non-recurring. Non-recurring is key. It doesn't benefit us anything to put someone in housing for a couple of months to return them to a state of homelessness. More trauma, more everything, and so that's not something that we're in support of moving forward.
I really appreciate your candor in all this. I have just one other question about this page from your packet.
Yes.
If you know when the last time this sheet was actually updated was, it's concerning because it looks like half of the city for outreach team coverage is serviced by people encouraging people. That's from what I can tell, that's roughly half of the city, all of Northeast, basically all of West Baltimore. But the address that's on here for people encouraging people is a house, a residential home in my district.
Okay.
And it hasn't been owned by people encouraging people since 2006.
Okay.
So I just want to be sure that when we have a service provider,
The map is correct. The address is likely wrong. It was updated this morning, I believe. However, we will check the address.
Yeah, there's even like some inconsistencies on their own website. There's references to the billing address for this address now is it looks like their old office in Clipper Mill, but
Okay.
their website now shows that their headquarters or executive office is in the unit block of Howard Street. So there's a bunch of inconsistency there, and I just want to make sure that we're really clear about who I need to contact. I mean, so for me, it raises questions like, is this the right person? Is this the right number? I want to be able to contact the right people.
Absolutely.
I want to make sure that our information is proper and up to date.
Yes, we'll get an updated version to you today. The breakout of the city is correct, and the reason that it is like that is because PEP receives more funding than the other outreach teams, and so they cover a larger service area.
Okay, cool.
But I will get correct contact information for you today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Burnett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to your office for all your hard work. And I know with all of the changes happening, Godspeed on that. I wanted to talk a couple areas. One of the big challenges in both speaking to service providers, but also reviewing some research. There was a big report done by the Able Foundation a few years back that did, I think, a pretty good job at looking at the issue of youth homelessness in particular. It's I know in your work, very difficult to track. The report used a quote, the invisible population. And it's a huge issue in talking to both service providers and youth advocates, school system, et cetera. Can you talk about the agency's strategy moving forward to address youth homelessness in Baltimore City from both tracking data, providing wraparound services? And one of the things I've continued to hear is that oftentimes youth may not necessarily realize that they are homeless because they may be couch surfing or staying at friends or distant family members' homes, and sort of a very transitional lifestyle, making it both difficult for them to self-identify and seek help, but more importantly to connect. Can you talk about some of the gaps in service that you see, the challenges that you see moving forward, and strategies that the agency is going to be using to address youth homelessness in Baltimore City?
Certainly. Thank you for that question. So one of the things that we're doing in response to youth homelessness, which is a growing population here in the city of Baltimore, is looking to fund more emergency shelter beds. So currently we have 10 emergency shelter beds in the city for people who are experiencing an episode of homelessness who are between the ages of 18 to 24. We know that we clearly have more than 10 homeless young adults in our city. We currently help to fund a drop-in center where people can go and obtain the services that they need. However, due to limited funding, they are only able to operate during certain periods of the day. And so we look forward over the course of the next 2 to 3 years with increased funding to be able to support them in staying open longer so that young adults who are in need can access those services in a timely manner. We have been working with Baltimore City Public School System to really understand how many homeless young adults we have out there. As you said before, sometimes young adults don't necessarily identify as being homeless because they're staying with their friends or they're couch surfing, and so they may not be willing to come forth and say, I am experiencing homelessness. And so we're looking at our coordinated access system to really be more user-friendly so that people know when I am in a state of crisis, where can I go to access the services that I need. While we only have 10 youth-dedicated shelter beds funded through the city, we do have, for young adults who are 18 to 24, we have access to our shelter system. The issue of concern there is it is extremely difficult for households to access our emergency shelters right now because our length of stay is so high. It's hard to know when to go to get a shelter bed, how often do I need to check back in, when is one going to free up. And so we recognize the importance of really improving our overall shelter system so that young adults have access to those beds as well. Yes, so we look forward to having more partnerships with youth-facing organizations and hope that the development of the Mayor's Office of Children and Youth and Family Success will be an opportunity for us to collaborate, to be able to have access to young adults when they're initially going through an episode of homelessness and help them to get to a place where they can stabilize. Over the course of the next year, we are also looking to launch a prevention and diversion program at our front doors of shelters. So one of the things that we recognize specifically for young adults, we have a number of people between the ages of 18 and 24 who have supports here in the city of Baltimore. Their mom may have asked them to leave for a number of reasons, grandma, but oftentimes when we're able to reach back out and mediate and connect with someone in their lives who cares about their situation and their progression moving forward, we're able to provide case management and mediation services that allow them to return home. So we look forward to enhancing those programs and helping young people to connect back to their natural supports while we work on building capacity in our shelters and rapid rehousing programs, and of course our permanent supportive housing programs, because we know those are programs that really work to help end homelessness for our young adults.
And just a follow-up, so you mentioned 10 beds for youth homeless. I know that there's similarly a lack of both capacity among existing providers as well as a need for new providers to enter into sort of the, I don't know how you would define
Homeless service arena.
Yeah,
Yes.
to the partners. What is the agency doing to both build capacity of existing providers through financial support and sort of just capacity building? Because I know sometimes there may be issues, sort of what the council member was describing, with partners not providing adequate care or support. So both the accountability side of existing providers, building their capacity to grow, but also what, if anything, is the agency doing to help foster the creation of new providers to increase the bed count in Baltimore City? Absolutely.
So again, we recognize that we can't depend on our agencies alone to end homelessness. Like it takes a village, and so I think over the course of the last couple of years, we have not done our due diligence in really offering the support to our providers to really help them to develop and have successful programs. And so what we have done over the course of the last few weeks is launched various collaboratives of sorts. So as recently as 2 weeks ago, we had the National Alliance to End Homelessness come in to to facilitate training to our emergency shelter providers. This is a training collaborative with our emergency shelter providers frontline service to help them to understand what best practices look like across the country, to help us realign our shelter system so that they are trauma informed and people are getting the help that they need. In addition to the emergency shelter training series, we're also in discussions with the National Alliance to bring together a training cohort for our rapid rehousing program, which is one that Councilmember Dorsey was just referencing. This is a program that's fairly new to our community, and so we recognize the importance of really bringing in people who live, sleep, and breathe this to talk to our providers about what other communities are doing that has been successful, what are the guidelines that drive our programs, and what are some of the performance indicators that we should be looking at along the way. Like I said, our rapid rehousing program is meant to be a temporary intervention. However, on the end of it, the whole goal is that individuals and families are able to sustain that housing long term. And so we recognize the importance of increasing our case management and ensuring that case management is occurring in those programs. Along the same line, we are just introducing a training cohort for all of our providers. So we'll include things like the delivery of Narcan if needed, because we have a large number of individuals in our shelters who oftentimes engage in drug use and may be susceptible to overdosing. And so we know that it is extremely important that our providers be able to intervene when that is an issue of concern. Trauma-informed care is also something that we are training our providers on, because we want them to be aware of the trauma that people have experienced and what they're coming to the table with, so that they can effectively deliver services moving forward. We also have cultural diversity and LGBTQ, just recognizing trainings, just recognizing that we want to be using the correct language. We want our providers equipped with all of the necessary tools that they need to be able to be successful in helping our homeless neighbors. And so that is something that we are very much committed to over the course of the next few years. There was a first part of your question.
The challenges to bringing on new providers, like just expanding the number of beds.
So one of the things that we're doing this year that has not been done historically is releasing an RFP for our emergency shelters. As part of this, because we're excited and we would like new providers to apply so that we have a a solid pool to select from. We will be hosting a RFP pre-release meeting where we are hoping to talk through all of the items in our action plan. When we're bringing in providers, we want them to understand our vision and understand that the expectation is that they can deliver services that are in alignment with our vision outlined in our action plan. And so we want to spend time talking to them about what that looks like. There are many of those elements embedded into the contract, and this contract for the first time ever has actual performance outcomes that we will be monitoring and holding people accountable for accomplishing. And so we are extremely intentional about who we are inviting to participate in this pre-proposal conference, and want an opportunity to really dialogue with them about what this means in terms of service delivery.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a couple more, but I want to defer to my colleagues.
Councilman Schleifer.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So I'm just curious, how do you guys follow up on incident reports from service providers? What does that follow-up look like?
So typically we have an incident report form. Providers are required to submit an incident report within 24 hours. We have a policy that this is outlined in. But for instances such as violence, death, we require incident reports within 24 hours. Upon receiving the incident report, we have various program administrators and monitors within our office that are tasked with following up with the provider. If we have additional questions, which we oftentimes do, we utilize this time to ask clarifying questions or to have the provider to submit a more comprehensive report so that we understand what occurred. And then we are asking providers to provide us with a corrective action on how they plan to rectify the issue moving forward. From time to time, there are incidents that will come to our office, and once we see them, we know that there is an existing policy gap, and when that occurs, then we take the necessary actions to introduce a policy that addresses that moving forward.
Okay, and so, I hear about a lot of programs, and I read up on all the information, but I would like to hear a little more about, with this increase in outreach that we keep hearing about and we talk about, what difference are we to expect about, we see homeless people laying down in the streets, hanging out in the streets. With all this outreach, what are the outcomes that we can expect to be seeing?
So for the outcomes that you can expect to receive are not limited to outreach. So it's important that I articulate that the people that you're seeing on the streets it's part of a systemic issue. So it's not, we have 3 city-funded outreach teams, but the outreach teams, their sole focus is to engage individuals and connect them to services. Services, oftentimes for someone who's laying on the street, is shelter. So if our shelters are full and our length of stays are high, individuals that are laying on the street are unable to access those resources. So it's a system transformation that has to happen. We have to increase our exits to permanent housing from shelters so that the people that are laying on the streets have access to some place to go. What you can expect we didn't get an increase in funding this year for our outreach services, but what you can expect, or which we hope that you are seeing already, are street outreach teams out engaging with people. What has happened in the last couple of months is we established an email address specifically for constituents. Council members have it where they can email us. We only have outreach teams deployed from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. But when we receive the email is dispatched to a homeless street outreach team. We split the city up so that homeless street outreach teams are able to respond promptly, and then we come back and we will give a response to what was done in response to that deployment. Again, to the point that I referenced earlier, we are going back out. Sometimes we go out and we engage with individuals, but it is an individual's right to refuse services. We do not have any enforcement mechanisms, and so the most that we can do is continue to engage people in hopes that one day they decide that enough is enough and I'm ready to take part in the services that the city has to offer.
Right. So I will say, I have interacted with your outreach teams, and they do a lot of great work, and they are passionate about what they're doing, and I've appreciated my interactions with them. I will also say on that note, and I'm certainly not putting it on them whatsoever, this is part of a bigger picture, is that, you know, this is, I guess, the third year I'm sitting through budget hearings on this topic, and frankly, it appears, at least to me, that the issue has only gotten worse, and I haven't actually seen, you know, this issue getting better. And so, you know, that is concerning to me. But one of the things that I do want to recommend, that I've recommended to the housing department, and you guys can echo this as well, is to make sure that we are providing services, especially, you know, put money aside for a second, all right? Because there's a lot of people looking for funding for different programs that are doing great work. Some are doing great work, some aren't doing great work, depending on what the program is and what, you know, they're dealing with. But people who come to the city and looking for resources that the city has to offer to help solve problems that we have, I think should be a top priority. And I'll be honest with you, I am extremely disappointed with how the situation was handled with the Generosity Global, the mobile showers. Here's a program that wanted to come in and simply offer showers to the homeless, which is a health thing, and has an incredible amount of benefits. The gentleman who runs the program, very passionate about the work he's doing. He's driven results. He came and spoke to the council at a council meeting, laid out his program. We were all on board supporting him. The council president at the time, you know, also he was interested in supporting him. Yet the guy was put through the ringer just to be able to hook up to one of our fire hydrants to get these showers up and running. And so that's a little distressing to me to see that happen, simply because I've been to block parties where, you know, they hook up to the fire hydrant for sprinklers for the kids to run in. Yet for people who are living on the streets to get a nice warm shower, that shouldn't be something that they should be facing any obstacles. We should be thanking these groups and begging them, can we do anything more for you other than getting all this stuff handled on the city side right away? And so, especially when people aren't coming and asking for, you know, they're not asking for money, and they're asking for city resources that we currently have in place, we need to do more about supporting those groups so that they can expand the work that they're doing, which benefits everybody.
I just want to touch upon that and address it. So Generosity Global actually came in and set up shop in the 12th district and Councilmember Costello's district and have been operating. I just want to clarify.
Yeah, that started recently.
It did.
This has
within
been
the last 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago.
I just want to clarify.
This has been for about a year and a half. They've been
right.
trying to get
I can't speak to anything that occurred before the 9 months of which I've been here. But I will say that the conversations, it wasn't so much that in recent conversations, I can't speak to what happened prior to my conversations beginning with Rich and Operation Global. But the conversations were more so, it wasn't that anyone did not want them to provide the services that they provided, but rather a discussion between them and the community. So one of the things that we think is extremely important, like we, of course, want people to have a place where they can go and shower and use the restroom and wash their clothes and have access to case management services. However, we also have neighbors like constituents and businesses who are extremely concerned about the plight of homelessness and how it impacts their business. And so those conversations of recent weeks were spent with the organization and the council member trying to agree upon a location that was acceptable to the community. So we definitely value the service, but as much as possible, we want to be good neighbors. We want to be good neighbors. We want to bring the community in. We want them to have input on the services that are offered in their community because we understand that it may impact their businesses. And so that negotiation did take some time because we had to bring the necessary partners to the table to engage accordingly.
Right, so the last thing I'll say on that, and I understand what you're saying as far as recent discussions, and so if you're only allowing me to go back 9 months, I'll go back 9 months. This process has not been easy. The city agencies have not been cooperative. And so you're talking about a logistical site location issue, which I understand all stakeholders need to come to the table and figure that out. And I appreciate the work that you guys have done in recent weeks on that. But the fact is that they have set up shop in when they've started and they've actually gone into the agencies and purchased, like water supply permits to be able to hook up to the water. And those are the kinds of things that I'm talking about. And so if they want to use fire hydrants, instead of charging them the $50 or whatever it costs to do that, they're providing a service that we're paying out grant money to different groups to do different, provide different services. This is a service they're providing for free. They need some water. We got the fire hydrant. Let's just hook them. Let's let them hook up to that fire hydrant and use that water. Those are the kinds of things I'm talking about. And so this isn't unique to your agency. I've said the same thing to the housing department when it comes to vacants in communities that we need them we need vacants to be rehabbed and dealt with to allow people have a streamlined process for local people in the communities who want to rehab the homes in their neighborhood to do so in a streamlined fashion and not be burdened with the process that can essentially discourage a lot of people from doing great work. So those are the kinds of things. So once the logistics are figured out, and I appreciate that work, I do not believe that we should be charging organizations like that who are doing not work that they want to do, work that we want done, and that we should be providing as it is. And so if they're providing that for us, those are things that we need to make sure that we're doing everything in our power to help them grow and expand, and we're not being penny wise and pound foolish asking them for $50 for a permit to connect to a water supply. Because if we discourage those kinds of people who all they need is to be connected to the water supply or something like that, we're going to end up spending millions of dollars to do the exact same thing by us having to do all the legwork and doing all the project that they've already done.
Understood. We look forward to working with you with our sister agencies to be able to streamline that process and allow for waivers wherever possible.
Jerry Ann, what's the current location where they're operating?
One is on Bath Street, kind of right behind Mercy. The other is right behind this diner. 400 Bath Street and 350 Holiday Street.
So, forgive me, but I don't believe that I was consulted about either of those two locations, which are in my district. And I did state that I had issues with the one over at the diner. I'm assuming that's 350 Holiday Street, over at the old diner.
Mm-hmm.
So, Councilman, what you should understand is that when the city developed the homeless services complex, which is in my district, they made commitments through a baseline agreement to the community of Mount Vernon, and the city has not followed through on those commitments. That's why people don't want those additional services in public. So just so everyone's clear on the same page, that's why there's a problem with having a proliferation of those services when the city is unable to provide basic services to those communities based on the impact that that creates. We want to all help individuals that are experiencing homelessness, but we also want to be cognizant of the impact that that has on the surrounding neighborhoods, and especially in Mount Vernon when you have a proliferation of those service providers, that creates quality of life issues around there. So I don't know why I wasn't contacted about those two locations. Is there someone from your office that did reach out to me?
So Jesse Stevens is our outreach lead. I believe the Bath Street location is in Councilmember Pinkett's district.
Bath?
I'm sorry, Councilmember Stokes' district.
What number Bath Street?
It's by Mercy.
That's me.
That's you?
That's me.
So we had initial meetings about this. In our meetings, we were told that you were already in discussion with the individual from the
I talked to the
organization.
individual once. Not by Mercy, 400 Bath Street.
The one that is in your district for sure is the diner, and so we,
400, yeah, 400 Bath appears to be in my, I don't know, it's in that little zigzag area by the JFX and Fallsway. I have to look at it on to pull up a council map for this.
Who was in the meetings that you had about
Hang on,
the
Councilman, I
locations?
got the floor. So who's the outreach person?
Jesse Stevens.
Where's Justice?
Jesse
Jesse.
Stevens.
You're Jesse? Did you reach out to me?
From my understanding, it was Councilmember Stokes that was in charge of that area, and he met with us there.
What about the diner? Diner's in the,
With the diner, we were told it was already approved.
approved by who?
We were told it was approved by you.
I didn't approve that.
You got written documentation of me approving that?
Not, this was all in a meeting that we had where it was
Who?
discussed.
With me? Who was
It
speaking?
was not
for,
with you. We initially
who was
had.
speaking for me?
I'm sorry?
Who spoke for me and said that I approved it?
The provider spoke for you. And we
What
should have, the provider of the mobile vans. We
And you
should
guys
have done
didn't
our.
do due diligence and come back to me and ask me if I approved it? You guys are a city agency. You guys didn't think to come back to me? You just take the word of a provider, that provider says Eric Costello is okay with it, so Eric Costello is okay with it?
So that is what occurred. Moving forward, we will definitely have a conversation with you and the provider following today and try to figure out where we go from here. However, we definitely had conversations regarding the importance of engaging the council members because we knew that it was a concern of the community when we come in with services and we have not taken the time to have conversations with them. And so that is our fault, and we will correct it moving forward.
I'm not sure how you're going to correct it because the facility's already operating there. What about Councilman Stokes? Because I know Councilman Stokes was opposed to it.
We had several conversations with Councilmember Stokes. We went out and did a site visit with the community, with members of the business community who had initial issues. They did a site visit of the Bath Street location. After hearing the full plan and seeing the location, he was okay with it. He agreed to it, and it took place 2 weeks ago.
Did you get that from Councilman Stokes firsthand?
We did.
Or did you get
Like
that from a provider
We
secondhand?
got that from him. As I said, we had a meeting with him and the provider. We additionally did a site visit of the site location with the provider and Councilmember Stokes.
Okay. We need to set up a meeting when this budget process is over for next week, because I need to be kept in the loop when you're doing things like this. Has there been any discussion with other city agencies about honoring everything that was memorialized in the baseline services agreement with the Mount Vernon community?
We have no knowledge of the baseline agreement that was
All right,
developed.
I'll dig it up and send it to you. I mean, your office
We'd
should be
appreciate that.
familiar with that occurred under Mayor Dixon, that my predecessor, Councilman Cole, negotiated with the mayor's office, that was put in place that included things like additional trash cleanup, additional street cleaning, guarantees on service time for restoration of streetlights that were out, et cetera. Quality of life issues that are related to when you have this type of operation in a community. I'm not opposed to having an operation in my district. What I'm opposed to is the city not stepping up and providing services to offset the impact of that for my constituents. That can't happen. That's unacceptable. Would you like if I put that in your neighborhood? Would you like if I put that in your neighborhood and didn't augment or supplement city services to offset the impact of that in your neighborhood? Can you imagine how my constituents feel? They're not happy. So we need to correct that starting next week. So I expect that we're going to have a meeting next week. We're going to sit down. We're going to talk about the operation. We're going to bring this provider in, and we're going to review the Mount Vernon agreement from 2009 or 2010 and make sure that city services are being provided and supplemented to that area. Does that sound reasonable?
We look forward to it.
Thank you. I do too. I appreciate it. Councilman Pinkett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not certain, this question may have already been asked, and I apologize for having to come in a little bit late, but it's in reference to service number 895 and the fact that that service has been decreased by almost $1 million. Was that already asked about?
It was not.
Okay. So can you speak to how the temporary housing service was so significantly decreased? And I see a portion of it says 1.6 million was reallocated to fund other services. Can you tell me what those other services are?
Mayor, do you want to speak to this specifically?
Good afternoon. Amir Sadi, Fiscal Director for
If you can, I'm speaking to the mic, sir.
Fiscal Director for Mayor's Office of Human Services. Those reduction is really not a reduction, is a repurposing and reallocation. So there currently $827,000, a little more, has been left unallocated in temporary Service 895 to accommodate our winter emergency sheltering. $129,560 has been repurposed to supplement the work of the outreach team to accomplish its purpose. 340,000 of that money was reduced by BBMR as a result of the matching which we had to last year provide for the Medicaid pilot. The goal is that that matching will be coming from an outside source. So that was the reduction to that line item.
So you said, I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt. You said that you anticipate 340,000 coming from an outside source. Do you already have a commitment for that?
No.
So why is it taken out?
That was not the information from Director Hickey. We were told that the Hospital Association had already made a verbal commitment to funding that Medicaid match.
I mean, I think it should be a little bit firmer than a verbal commitment. I mean, if we want to take it out of the budget. Okay, I got you. That's not your.
That reduction was not something that we advocated for or we even wanted it. That's something we have been, Director Anthony has been studiously trying to get that back, but we realized that within the.
And I agree. Maybe I'm wrong. It seems like in other, is it just arbitrary when we put stuff in the budget in anticipation of other monies coming? Because sometimes it seems like we put the money in the budget, and sometimes we don't. So what determines when we leave money in the budget, even when we're anticipating other money from another source?
So in this particular instance, the MOHS budget, particularly in homeless services, in fiscal 19 was raised by $2.4 million. Two of it was for winter sheltering, and $400,000 was built in for additional positions in outreach. Mm-hmm. At that point, part of that $2 million was a commitment from MOHS that they would independently fundraise for the Medicaid match.
Okay.
During the budget process, we worked directly with agencies to figure out if there are any efficiencies or one-time money that has been appropriated in the prior year that could be taken out. Mm-hmm. We had a commitment from the director that the money was committed by an outside source, and so we felt it was appropriate to take out as it was initially meant as a one-time.
So what happens if, for example, this 340 doesn't come from the hospitals?
We would look to find it within, in this particular case, the entire mayorality.
Okay. I'm sorry.
So we take it on a one-by-one. I understand your frustration, similar to the housing issue.
Yes,
with weatherization. In that instance, we found out in April about the match, so
right.
It was way past our budget process. But we take it on a case-by-case. If there are matching requirements, we ask that agencies come as soon as possible so we can factor it into our budget process, and then it becomes a policy decision by the administration.
Okay.
But it's a one-by-one. If there's a match, or similarly, if a grant is going away, that is a policy decision whether to continue that program
Gotcha.
or not.
So if the money doesn't come in, we need to know quickly. I'm sorry. If you can continue, sir.
Say that again.
If you can continue telling us.
Sure. $617,000 was repurposed to specific providers that will provide during the winter sheltering also. For example, McVet will provide shelter and outreach services. We have increased funding for our transportation hub so we can facilitate the movement of our homeless folks among shelter and back and forth. We have increased funding for our men's shelter by nearly $265,000. Increased funding for WHRC, which is our main shelter provider, so they could coordinate the efforts between October and March when we have increased number of need for when the temperature reaches about 32 degrees. We have increased funding for Sarah's Hope, again, in culmination and in effort to our winter sheltering. Also, we have repurposed about $500,000 to administration, which will fund salaries of the directors. In return, this will free up funds from our admin dollars, which we receive from federal government, that we could put into case management and other relative need of the agency, case management, support services, and so on.
So 500,000 is being reallocated to administration.
Correct.
Salaries, so that another
Correct.
500,000 can be freed up.
Yes.
So somewhere in this budget, there's an additional $500,000 somewhere for service.
What
What service
happened
is that?
before is per HUD regulation and OMB regulation, those individuals that do not work directly under the grant cannot be charged to the grant. The directors here are preliminary spend 99% of the time on city-related work. So we are not a direct service delivery folks to be charged to COC grant or HOPWA grant or ESG grant. So when our salaries is taken from those revenues which we draw for those grants, that means it freed them up. So we can put case managers, monitors, as we talked about, compliance, and program administrators, accountants, so on, that we could do a better monitoring, a better grant management, a better homeless. It's a balancing act that we figure out it will pay off. And it keeps us in compliance with federal regulation and state regulation.
Just as a summary, there's a lot of moving pieces with the MOHS budget. Their grants are very restrictive about who and what can be spent on them. So some people and charges were moved onto the grant, some moved onto the general fund to be in compliance with the grant. Again, the overall budget was increased about 2.4 million in 19. That the only thing that was taken out was that Medicaid match. So they're still on a baseline above $2-ish million.
Right. So with all this moving of dollars, how is temporary housing being impacted? Like, are we moving dollars and it's causing us not to be able to provide the same level of resource or service in the area of temporary housing, or we move the money to something else, but it still supports temporary housing?
So in the 19, I think what makes it confusing, in the 19 budget, the prior administration had instructed BBMR to put $2 million, and we put it temporarily in that service as a placeholder. Once the plan had kind of come to fruition, Director Anthony came on board. We reallocated it in partnership with MOHS to get the money into where it's programmatically being spent.
So is that generally how the homeless budget is, that money's just put in different buckets and then we just decide that we move it around based upon leadership policies?
No, it's not. This came out of, if you remember, from winter of 2016, when first year of Catherine Pugh's, and we had the tent city and the encampment right around here, about 60 or 70 people, and I don't want to go through that.
Yeah.
So in a rush to remedy the plan was to inject about $2.4 million in MOHS budget, which was injected into service number 895. Obviously, when you're trying to deal with the veracity of the issue, you might need to move this fund, do an appropriation adjustment to take him to a different service level to do that. So that's how it started. Last year was the second year of this that, again, was put into that service. We took time with the program, with the leadership, to see where the funding needs to go first. As a fiscal director, it's my responsibility to make sure city is protected as far as the regulation with federal and state, to make sure we are in line so we have no issue in future, and of course, get the best bang for our dollar as well.
So, Jerry, does this new reallocation reflect your vision for this agency?
If we are able to get
You have to come to the mic.
If we are indeed able to get the Medicaid match from the source that we suspect or have been told that we will be able to, we will be in good shape. It allows us to sustain our current level of funding, and we're fine with that.
Okay.
If you want to give us extra money, we will, of course, put it to great use.
Of course you will. I'm fine. Well, I did have one other, that was a kind of a long question, so I want to be respectful of it.
Jerry Ann, I
Yes,
want
sir.
to tell you that I do think that you're doing an absolutely outstanding job, and your staff has been fantastic outside of the communication issue, which
Yes, sir.
sounds like we're going to get resolved last week. I'm very happy that you're with the city, and I hope you'll continue to do the great work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Before we go to Councilwoman Clark, just as a reminder, we're about 3 minutes past. Lunch is from 12:30 to 1. I'm going to turn it over to Councilwoman Clark. Mike, please.
I just wanted to ask about the budget chief. We had a discussion before you gentlemen were here. We need about $250,000 in general funds added in order to, for a equity lens to go toward more grassroots providers of services. And I don't know whether anyone else would agree with me, but that recommendation, I made that recommendation, and it would require $250,000. But it would have to be general funds because of exactly the issues that have been discussed. We need the flexibility.
Councilwoman,
Thank you.
Would it be okay to meet with MOHS to develop what that would look like and do an official cost estimate and report
I would
back?
be grateful, yes, if that would happen, sir.
We can commit to
Mr.
that.
Ramos, is that okay with the chair?
Absolutely. Jeff, you got it.
Yes. That's request number 122.
Councilman, anything else?
Just a quick question. I would imagine that oftentimes in the engagement you encounter, and if this homeless individuals who are facing a variety of medical issues, from high blood pressure to diabetes, you name it. What measures do we have in place to, as we engage them, to not only put them in temporary housing, but get them in an environment where they can properly recover, whether that be assisted living or some other scenario?
So our outreach teams are charged with doing all of that. So they're charged with connecting them to healthcare if needed, Medicaid, Medicare. For also, many of our participants go to healthcare for the homeless or other participating medical systems to receive the care that they need. They're also tasked with helping them to obtain vital records, so birth certificates, social security cards. While clients are staying on the streets, our outreach teams really value checking on them to ensure that they have access to the services that they need. So when and where appropriate, they have the ability to refer to convalescent care units. And I will say, as recently as this past winter, we've partnered really closely with our hospitals and ensured that when they have someone that is seeking services but has been served and can move on, they have been contacting our outreach team so that we're going out, we can engage, we can connect them to places where they can get prescriptions filled, ongoing healthcare needs met, et cetera.
So, for example, are there formal partnerships with a variety of assisted living facilities where you could directly, as you engage someone could be directly referred and have intake at one of those?
We don't have any formal agreements, but our homeless shelter providers oftentimes have those in their resource book. So if they have an individual who is a senior who qualifies for the programs, they can refer them accordingly. But it's not a formal agreement between the city and those organizations. It's oftentimes between the provider and the organization itself.
Is there something that would keep us from that, or is that just bad policy? I don't know. It just seems like it would be to the benefit of our efforts if there were, even something as reserved beds in certain assisted living facilities that somebody could be directly
referred to. I think it's a valid point. It's increasing our supply of affordable housing that may be an affordable housing option to a senior or someone who would really qualify and benefit from services of that sort. So it's definitely something that we can explore.
Okay. That would be something that I want to explore, Jeff. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We're now in recess till 1 p.m.
Thank you.